After 8 years and 7 Steely Dan albums packed with questionable characters moving through all sorts of seedy situations, Donald Fagen went surprisingly personal on his debut solo album, The Nightfly. The album was titled after a character, Lester the Nightfly, created by Fagen based on jazz radio DJs he listened to as a kid in the 1960s. This album is vaguely autobiographical. I think it's possible to be more personal and subjective when you're working by yourself, Fagen stated in 1983 about how his solo work differed from Steely Dan. Walter and I had a collective identity. I still try and maintain a distance, but it has to be more personal too. I used to live about 50 miles outside New York City, in one of those rows of prefab houses that all looked the same. It was a bland environment, Fagen said. One of my only escapes was late-night radio shows that were broadcast from Manhattan. Jazz and rhythm and blues. To me, the disc jockeys were very romantic and colorful figures, and the whole hipster culture of black lifestyle seemed much more vital to a kid living in the suburbs as I was. A lot of kids went through the same thing, although I guess as I listened to jazz, I was in a minority. That's why there was an explosion of hipsterism in the 60s, although it turned into something else. The era was also known for the prevalent Cold War with the Soviet Union, leading to such phenomenons as backyard bomb shelters and American classrooms conducting preparation drills in case the big one was dropped on the US. This is a parallel between America of that time and America today, Fagen said, when asked why the album had such a focus on the Cold War era. It's relevant culturally and to a certain extent politically. The main reason is that I'm 34 and I started thinking about why I became a musician. I was headed toward a different kind of life, really, maybe an English teacher or something like that. I studied literature at college and basically had my course set out for me. When the 60s came along, I perceived that there were other options, and since music was my hobby, I decided to try and make a living at it. Working with an esteemed cast of session players, including Greg Phillinganes, Larry Carlton, and Steve Jordan, Fagen and company crafted one of the earliest examples of a fully digital recording. It required album engineers to take an actual class on digital technology. There were enough snafus along the way for Fagen to want to throw in the towel on the whole process. I was ready to transfer to analog and give it up on several occasions, but my engineering staff kept talking me into it. After 8 months of recording and 10 days of mixing, the LP was ready to go. The first sounds from the album arrived September 1982 in the form of lead single, IGY. It's bizarre. Coming out of jazz, it's different from the way most groups go, Fagen said in 1983 about his place in the world of music. They start with very little musical knowledge and have different theatrical values. I'm not even sure what kind of music it is I do. I suppose you'd have to call it rock and roll. I think all the other influences lend a complexity that pop music doesn't have, though. Although irony seems to be the perspective through which most people see the world these days, whether it's in pop music or whatever, and as far as attitude goes, a lot of people have caught up with that.